Welcome back to DCB's weekly college football recap. All right, folks, it has been a very long weekend over here in the DCB household. We did 3 spaces this weekend, one in college football, as we always do, 10 a.m. Eastern Time every Saturday morning, where we break down the entire slate of college football. We also did an NFL space on Sunday morning, breaking down that full slate. Very successful day for us in that sport as well. And then late last night, a preview of the college basketball season, all of the major conferences, and talked through the Monday college basketball games as well. Obviously, this will be going live too late to be able to bet those games, but those picks will also be on my Twitter. So if you're not already, be sure you're following me over there on Twitter at DailyCFBCBB. But enough of that. Let's get into today's episode where we recap Week 10 of college football and look ahead to Week 11. As always, we'll go through and give some takeaways from all of the biggest games from Week 10, but it's just crazy to me that I'm saying that number out loud at this point. It feels like the season has absolutely flown past. Going into Week 11, most teams have already played 3/4 of their regular season games. That's why no matter how much this sport can sometimes frustrate us, it's always key to just appreciate every single Saturday that we get throughout a college football season because there are really a pretty limited amount. We're just starting November here, and it feels like the season is already starting to wind down, even with the extended postseason. I love the regular season even more personally. I've always been a regular season first type of college sports fan, especially on the football side, but here we are, looking ahead to Week 11, season flying past. All right, as always, we begin with some midweek action from Week 10. We had a couple of games on Tuesday night once again, one of them in the Sun Belt between James Madison and Texas State. This was a bad pick on my part that I gave to you guys on the podcast last week. I thought the home dog had a great chance in this game, but Texas State continues to be one of the most unpredictable teams in the country, especially at the G5 level. They have a ton of talent offensively, and they scored 20 points in the second quarter in this game, but ultimately finished with 20 for the entire game. James Madison shut it down the rest of the way. Texas State has a massive offensive line that they just don't seem to know how to use that well. Their quarterback, he's had a great season as a freshman, really been dynamic, both running and throwing, but he had 3 interceptions in this one. And James Madison continues to roll through the Sun Belt season. They've won 6 straight, and their only loss is on the road at Louisville. So as much as the talk about the playoff spot out of the group of 5 is mostly focused on the American Conference teams, it's possible that JMU has a case to be made as well at the end of the season if they finish 12-1 with a Sun Belt championship. Another team that was victorious on Tuesday night and another team possibly contending for a conference championship was Kennesaw State, picking up another relatively easy and straightforward conference win over UTEP, 33-20. They moved to 6-2 on the season, and I don't think they'll be in contention for the playoffs. Unfortunately, with 2 losses out of the Conference USA, the competition is just simply too weak at that level. But hey, you've only been at the Division I level for 2 seasons, and you're already getting a chance to possibly win a conference title. They've got 4 games remaining, and 3 of them are on the road. But at this point, especially offensively, they look like the class of CUSA. 2 pretty competitive Conference USA games on Wednesday night. Not really a ton to say about either of them. Again, just 4 bad teams playing football there on Wednesday. Jacksonville State with a 3-point road win over 1-7 Middle Tennessee State. They have consistently struggled on the road, especially when you compare it to their home results. And then Missouri State, got to give them some credit. Their first season in Division I, they're just 1 win now away from bowl eligibility, beating FIU 28-21. Hell of a season for the Bears, even though they are ineligible to compete for the conference title. Thursday night featured two absolute shootouts, and just from a betting perspective, I do want to point something out to you guys. In general, I think that overs in midweek games have been a good trend throughout this season. There have been a lot of shootouts in these Tuesday through Friday night games. But at the same time, look at this past week's results, and it's a perfect example, once again, of why you want to have a kind of a zigzag method to your betting strategy, because recency bias can heavily affect the way that people look at games. Tuesday night, you had two games, both of them soared over their totals. Wednesday night, then you turn around, you have two low scoring games that both go under. Thursday night, two games that go back over their totals. So it's just an example. There's a lot of back and forth in the betting markets. Don't get caught up in what your eyes have seen most recently. The most notable result on that Thursday night slate was UTSA picking up a big win over Tulane, 48-26. Told you guys this was the more talented team on paper with the Roadrunners here at home. Owen McCown, their quarterback, had a nearly perfect day through the air, completing 31 of his 33 pass attempts for 370 yards and 4 touchdowns. Tulane's secondary just completely unable to get them off the field throughout the game. Big loss for Tulane here, as they now fall into a 6-way tie in the loss column in the American Conference. They'll still have other opportunities to compete and win this conference, but they have to go to Memphis this upcoming Friday, and they are about a touchdown underdog at the time of speaking. Friday night was Halloween, and if you didn't watch these games, you did not miss out on much of anything. This genuinely may have been the worst 3-game slate of college football I have ever seen. You had two complete and total blowouts in the small conference games, with Memphis beating Rice 38-14, and it never really felt even that close. Louisiana Tech pounded Sam Houston 55-14 in the late night game. And then you had Syracuse against North Carolina in the ACC battle. Syracuse ended up starting their third string quarterback, who originally was a lacrosse recruit, and he looked like it out there in this game. He completed just 4 of 18 passes for 39 yards. Not entirely sure what Fran Brown was doing putting him in that position. Maybe he thought North Carolina's defense was just that bad that anybody he put in that system was going to be able to be effective. But Cuse only able to put up 10 total points, all in the first half. Shut out in the second half by the Tar Heels, who win this one 27-10. All right, let's head over to the main show on Saturday. As always, ton of games up and down the slate. I would say there was a fair amount of exciting action in the early window. We had an SEC matchup between Texas and Vanderbilt. A lot of this game was not close, and that's because for really the first time all season, the Texas offense was humming in this one. They put up 34 points all in the first 3 quarters. Were pretty conservative down the stretch, trying to run out the clock, and allowed Vandy to really make a pretty exciting comeback attempt in this one, cutting it all the way down to a 3-point margin in the end, 34-31. But Arch Manning in this game looked phenomenal, threw for over 300 yards for the second consecutive week. No picks, 3 touchdowns. The run game was solid enough. They ran for 3.7 yards per carry against a very good front 7. That's all you can really ask for. Just a little bit of balance. Vandy, impressive comeback attempt here, and Pavia really got going with some of his receivers, especially stud tight end Eli Stowers with a big touchdown late, one of 2 scores in this game for him. But it did appear that Vandy was a little overmatched at the line of scrimmage, especially early on against that Texas front 7 loaded with NFL players. Still have a lot of confidence in Vanderbilt going forward. This loss didn't knock them too far down in the rankings. They're still at number 15 in the AP poll, and two losses in this era, as crazy as it is to say, does not eliminate you from the national title conversation. So they absolutely could still make it into the playoff if they finish 10-2 in the SEC. They've got back-to-back home games to look forward to against Auburn and Kentucky before hitting the road against Tennessee in the season finale, which Vanderbilt has found quite a bit of success against Tennessee in recent years, usually from a much bigger underdog role. They may actually be favored in Neyland Stadium for maybe the first time in all of history. We'll have to keep an eye on that one in a couple of weeks. A couple of wild games in the ACC at noon on Saturday. First, let's talk about Miami. Once again, Mario Cristobal and the Hurricanes start a season on fire and start to fall apart around this time of year. We head into November and Miami picks up their second loss. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this team as potentially being the best in the country. They had 3 top 25 wins on the resume, including obviously the opener against Notre Dame. But now with losses on Friday night at home 2 weeks ago against Louisville and here against SMU on the road, they are very unlikely to find a way back into the ACC title picture and thus likely to miss the playoff once again. This was always a very nice bounce back spot for SMU coming off of the tough loss on the road at Wake Forest the week prior. And they really gutted this one out on both sides of the ball. Their defense has really stood up against the run game for several weeks in a row now. Kevin Jennings really has not been great for most of the season, but I thought he played his best game here. They really were unable to get their run game going against Miami's defensive line, but Jennings ended up with 365 passing yards, and for only the second time all season, he did not throw an interception. Big for SMU and a big win for Rhett Lashley and co. to get things back on track. SMU now 6-3 and also out of the ACC title picture, but still on track to have, once again, a very respectable season down there. The other ACC game, honestly, was a contender for Game of the Year, and that's Duke going into Clemson and coming away with a 46-45 win. This one was absolutely wild in so many different ways. It was back and forth throughout the game. Duke jumped all over Clemson 21-7. Not the first time that the Tigers have fallen behind at home this season, but they did battle back to take the lead in the second quarter, 28-21. Duke then would not lead again until 40 seconds remaining in the game when they scored a touchdown to seemingly tie the game, but decided to go for 2 and succeeded. Duke also had a big kick return touchdown in this game. There were a lot of electric plays and a ton of defensive breakdowns, so if you were able to watch this game, you were treated to a dandy. This is now shockingly the 4th home loss of the season for Clemson. Darian Mensah continues to play like the best quarterback in the ACC for Duke. He's now up to 21 passing touchdowns with only 2 picks on the season. And as of Sunday, Duke is now your new favorite to win the ACC. Can you believe that? 5-3 Duke, 2 losses out of conference, so only 1 in the ACC, and they are, as of right now, the favorites to win this league. It's a bit of a jumbled mess at the top with Georgia Tech, Louisville, and Virginia all being very close in the odds, but Miami's second loss has really shaken things up here, and a real dramatic change in the odds this week. A couple of major results in the early window out of the Big 12. Had a couple of teams hit the road and pull off some big outright upsets, beginning with Arizona State as a 7.5-point dog on the road at Iowa State. They handed the Cyclones their 4th straight loss with a backup quarterback in this game. Jeff Sims stepping in once again for Sam Leavitt. did not go well at all in attempt number 1 at Utah. This game went very differently, and it was mostly because of Arizona State's persistence in running the quarterback. Raleek Brown, the running back, did contribute as well, but Jeff Sims ends this game with 29 rush attempts for 228 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, he did also fumble twice, which kind of allowed Iowa State to hang around in this game. But we've mentioned multiple times on this podcast that the Sun Devil defense is very underrated, and they really showed it in this one, holding Iowa State to just 3 points in the entire second half. They picked off Rocco Becht late in the game as well to kind of seal it and pick up a big 5-point win on the road. Their schedule is very manageable the rest of the way, so very likely that we'll see a 9-3 Arizona State when it's all said and done. And the other major upset in the Big 12 there was West Virginia going into Houston. The second that the Cougars jump into the AP Top 25 at number 22, they get upset and they give up 45 points to a team that otherwise had looked lifeless for most of the season offensively. West Virginia's team total line in this game was 17.5, juiced heavily under, and that's because they'd only gone over that line one time in their 5 previous Big 12 games. However, they really seem to have found a rhythm with their new quarterback, true freshman Scotty Fox Jr. He didn't have a huge game in this one, but he was efficient enough in the pass game and added quite a bit with his legs as a combination with freshman running back Dior Hubbard. West Virginia has a ton of injuries on this side of the ball, so Rich Rodriguez, I guess, has decided to just go as young as possible and just get these guys some experience. Not only that, but they come up with the big upset win here, so that's a nice bonus for them. Houston is a difficult team to evaluate because they haven't played a very difficult schedule. They did obviously get the big road win at Arizona State, but this loss raises a lot of alarm bells, and they are now a slight underdog on the road at UCF this week, another team with a considerably worse record than them. Even at 7-2, they may struggle to close out the season the way that they want to. Notable Group of 5 results early in your weekly North Texas report. The Mean Green with another win here at home against previously undefeated Navy. They beat them by 14 points, 31-17. A little bit more of a muted effort out of Drew Mestemaker. He didn't have to do as much because his running back, Caleb Hawkins, absolutely took over this one. Nearly 200 yards on the ground and 4 rushing touchdowns. I love it when teams have the mentality of taking it to the military academies in the trenches, considering that that's all those teams do is run the football. So if you can respond in kind, that always has got to feel good for a team. Navy remains in the running for the conference title with only 1 loss, but the next 3 weeks are absolutely brutal for their schedule. They got all their easier games out of the way early. Now they've got to go to Notre Dame this week for their yearly rivalry game there, and then they follow up with South Florida and a road trip to Memphis. So none of those will be easy. I would not be shocked if they go 0-3. And another one that I'll give a quick shout out to before we move to the mid-afternoon slate, New Mexico picking up a road win at UNLV. We knew the Rebels were a little bit fraudulent, starting 6-0 and still somehow having a negative yardage differential, and they've started to show it now with back-to-back losses in conference play. Got to give a lot of credit to New Mexico, though. Their head coach, Jason Eck, very creative with their offense. He will probably be looking at some better offers this offseason, especially if some of the higher tier Group of 5 jobs start to open with some of those guys moving up to some of the current openings. I thought that Texas Tech could possibly get caught looking ahead a little bit this week as they played on the road at Kansas State, a team that appeared to be resurgent after a very rough start to the season. But Texas Tech, after a little bit of a slow start, they did take care of business in this game 43-20. Reestablishing themselves as the favorite in the Big 12, especially in the odds market. They've got a big game this upcoming weekend against number 8 BYU, top 10 matchup there. However, they're a double-digit favorite, so the books seem to disagree that both of them are top 10 caliber, but we will see if Texas Tech can take care of business once again there. BYU, incredibly well-coached team, but Texas Tech, in this game at least, does take care of business and got back to playing very well offensively behind quarterback Baron Morton, who managed to make through 60 minutes fully healthy, which you always like to see. Indiana, don't need to spend too much time on this game individually, just got to continue to shout them out. And an unbelievable blowout once again, 55-10 on the road at Maryland. This is just what Kurt Cignetti seems to do against inferior competition, just blowout city week after week. Big SEC game, especially for the Twitter Spaces panel personally. Myself and Parlay P on opposite sides of this one in Florida versus Georgia. Really thought we had a good chance here with the Gators to win this one outright for a good portion of this game. Unfortunately, just couldn't get enough going offensively. Had some injuries at the wide receiver position kind of stack up throughout this game and really were not able to target anyone outside of Trey Wilson III, who did have a huge game for Florida here, 9 catches, 121 yards, and a touchdown. Georgia, though, just a very resilient team. We've seen it week after week, even though they trailed for much of this one, including by 3 points throughout the fourth quarter. They take the lead with 4:30 to go on a Chauncey Bowens 36-yard rushing score, and their defense once again able to clamp down in the fourth quarter. It seems like that unit gets stronger as the game goes on, which is not normal for teams, but that's Kirby Smart for you. Disappointing loss for Florida. I guess they did cover the spread, and very difficult beat if you were on Georgia here because Gunnar Stockton, the quarterback, had a chance to run in a wide open touchdown to go up by 10 or 11 points, decided to slide down and take a knee to run out the clock. So a nice cover there for Florida, but unfortunately not the outright win that they were looking for. Not a ton else to play for outside of the other rivalry game against Florida State to end the year for Florida. We'll see how they respond moving forward. Georgia, still a ton to play for, obviously. Just one loss in their season. They're a top 5 team, but they also have some tricky games remaining on their schedule, beginning with a road trip to Starkville, Mississippi this week. There were not a ton of close games or notable results across the midday slate, but one that did stick out to me in the Big Ten was an overtime win for Minnesota, 23-20. Somewhat controversial calls towards the end of this one. I won't get too much into that, but I do want to comment on Michigan State's quarterback situation. Once again, it's been a storyline for a few weeks now. Aiden Childs continues to struggle, and they finally decided to give the reins over to the freshman Alessio Milivojevic, and he played very well, throwing for 311 yards and a touchdown. It seemed like the play calling got a little bit too conservative down towards the red zone, especially late in the game, but he was connecting with a number of different receivers, not just the NFL prospect Nick Marsh. This was very much a classic win for Minnesota, grinded out type of game. Had some success on the ground, which was big for them, ripped off a 49-yard run, and ultimately come away with a close win here at home, 23-20. The Gophers are already bowl eligible now at 6-3. They've got a bye week before hitting the road to play Oregon on a Friday night. Number 15, Virginia. Yes, Virginia, top 15 team, continues one of the most fortunate runs we have ever seen in major college football, as they win their 7th straight game, back-to-back on the road, this time at Cal, 31-21. They sealed it late with yet another defensive score, a pick 6 to walk this one off. They just seem to be that team this year that has the magic going, and until that stops, it's going to be difficult to get in front of them. They do face Wake Forest this week, which could be a little bit of a tricky matchup for them, but it is at home. It's going to be another spot where it's probably popular to fade Virginia because of how lucky they've been. I think we should be patient and wait just one more week before we fade this team. Another big ACC result in the night slate as we move later in the day now. North Carolina State knocked off previously undefeated and top 10 Georgia Tech 48-36. Major shootout in this game. Georgia Tech defensively just unable to get off the field all night long. NC State was 8 of 12 on third down and had nearly 600 yards of total offense. They scored at least 10 points in every quarter of this game. Not only that, but NC State was missing their best player. Their star running back, Hollywood Smothers, did not play. Jaden Scott, true freshman backup, stepped in. No problem. 196 yards and a touchdown. CJ Bailey was excellent as well at the quarterback spot. Georgia Tech has been flirting with disaster for weeks now, but did not expect to see this type of display for them on defense. They will have a bye now to get prepared for Boston College on the road in 2 weeks. But really, I think their eyes are probably focused on the Georgia game to end the season. The biggest game of the day, arguably, and at least in the night slate, was in the SEC, as most of the biggest games are this season, and that's Oklahoma going into Tennessee. Not intimidated by the night environment at Neyland Stadium. They come out with a win, 33-27. John Mateer once again did struggle in this game at the quarterback spot for OU. He really has not looked the same since his hand injury, but they seemingly have found a run game, finally. They haven't been able to run the ball all season, but they've rotated between a number of different backs, and they've finally settled on one who can actually produce for them. That is Xavier Robinson. 3 straight games now where he's been very productive and scored a touchdown. 115 yards on the ground in this one. Mateer did make some clutch throws when they needed him to, but really it was the OU defense responding after getting shredded by that Lane Kiffin Ole Miss offense last week. The Sooners started their scoring in this game with a fumble return that featured one of the meanest stiff arms I've ever seen. Our Mason Thomas. Don't shout out too many individual players on this podcast, but he absolutely deserves one for that. He dragged that guy probably 20 yards on that stiff arm. That was amazing to watch. Ended up taking it all the way to the house on the road for a defensive touchdown. That had to have been an incredible feeling. Big win for Oklahoma. This loss, the third for Tennessee on the season. They've played 3 difficult teams and lost to all of them, and that will effectively eliminate them from playoff contention. They have a bye this week before facing New Mexico State, which should be a cupcake game. But then they've got to go to the Swamp, where they haven't won since the turn of the century. So good luck with that. Couple of games in the night slate for the Big Ten featuring ranked teams. I'll start with my Michigan Wolverines against Purdue. Far from an impressive result here, 21-16, the home win. I will say Michigan is a team that just continues to be banged up all season long. They started the season having multiple offensive linemen out for the season, multiple key secondary pieces that have been in and out of the lineup all year, beginning with the stud safety Rod Moore, who has still only played 2 games to this point. They picked up some more key injuries in this one with Donovan McCulley, the receiver, going out and not returning. Jayshon Barham on the defensive side of the ball as well, one of the most impactful players in the Big Ten, did not return in this one. And then Justice Haynes, the star running back, had been leading the nation in rushing before his injury, but he actually underwent surgery, so he is unlikely to play for the rest of the regular season at minimum. If Michigan were able to somehow make it into the playoffs, maybe he would return at some point for that, but not looking great for Michigan in terms of the outlook and the health of this team overall. They really were carried by Jordan Marshall in this game, the backup running back who will now be the starter for the rest of the season. 185 yards and 3 touchdowns. Great game for him. He is truly a bell cow back. He does not mind getting 25 to 30 carries a game. He's very physical, will always fall forward in short yardage. Exactly the type of back that Michigan likes to have. So obviously it would be nice to have both of them out there with him and Haynes, but we're going to have to lean on Marshall moving forward. We'll see if Michigan can improve a little bit heading into the Ohio State game. They've got 2 more, I guess you can call them tune-up games, but can't look past Northwestern and Maryland before playing Ohio State. And the other Big Ten result was USC going into a very hostile environment in Nebraska and picking up a major road win. I really did not think they played well at all in this game. They fell behind early, 7-0 after the first quarter. Really couldn't get much going offensively, did not score a touchdown until late in the third quarter. Their quarterback, Jaden Mayava, completed just 9 of 23 passes. He threw an interception, which has been a rarity for him this season. And you got to give some credit to that Nebraska crowd. They were fired up. It was a blackout night. They were wearing the jerseys. Everybody was in sync. Unfortunately, Matt Rule has just consistently struggled to beat ranked teams, not only at Nebraska, but throughout his college career as a coach. Nebraska's offensive line continues to be a major issue. Emmett Johnson, the running back, had a great game for them in this one, but they just haven't been able to protect Raiola. And as a result, there are virtually no explosive plays from this offense. USC much more athletic defensively this year, and they're able to limit big plays as well. So they come away with a big road win here, 21-17. Key win for the Trojans as they jockey for position in the second tier of the Big Ten. Big time blowout in a ranked on ranked Big 12 late night matchup. Maybe there was a reason that they had this game kick off at 10:15 Eastern time. Didn't really need anybody to watch this one. Utah just came out and dominated Cincinnati 45-14 from start to finish. They really never let off the gas from the opening kickoff, dominating this one on both lines of scrimmage. That's just what Utah does to you. They have a very good offensive line. They controlled the time of possession for over 40 minutes in a 60-minute game. They ran the ball a whopping 53 times, and I'm sure Cincinnati's defense got very tired by the end of the game. The Bearcats have definitely benefited from a pretty easy backloaded schedule, but now we're getting to some of the tougher games down the stretch. They've still got to play Arizona and BYU and also travel to TCU, so I don't think this will be the final loss for Cincinnati. 2 more games that I'll mention, and then we'll move along to previewing a few of the biggest games of Week 11. Would you believe it if I told you that neither of these games featured a team scoring more than 10 points? Well, that's what we had here. One in the SEC, where one team was actually favored by more than 10 points. That was Auburn, and they didn't even score enough points to give themselves a chance to cover that number as they lost 10-3 to Kentucky. Turns out that was the final nail in the coffin for Hugh Freeze. I really thought the win over Arkansas might start to turn things around for this team and possibly even save his job. Maybe some of the players heard some of those rumblings and decided they didn't want that to happen. It didn't seem like they wanted to play for him particularly hard in this game. Real rough performance out of the backup quarterback in Ashton Daniels, the transfer from Stanford. Another lost season for Auburn and a big win for Kentucky, I guess you could say. Still a bottom feeder in the SEC. They're not going to be contending for anything here and still very unlikely to make a bowl game. But I suppose they gave themselves a chance here, moving to 3-5, and they still have Tennessee Tech on the schedule. So a free win there. Just got to find 2 more. And the other game, we always save the best for last. I've been trying to give this team a shout out for weeks, and I finally can. It's the Oregon State Beavers with their first win over a Division I football team this season. And this, I guess, was the Pac-12 championship game. between the only two teams remaining in that conference, at least right now. That's going to change next year, but Oregon State with a 10-7 home win. I did not watch a second of this game, and I'm very glad I didn't, looking at this box score, because by golly, this is some ugly football. The two teams were combined 3 for 24 on third down. Oregon State won this game with just 184 total yards of offense. So, real rough there, but got to give it to the Beavers, persevering and finally getting themselves a win. They are now 2-7, but the other win was against FCS Lafayette last week. Time to shift our focus forward to week 11. Let's preview some of the most interesting games of this upcoming week. And we got to start with Tuesday, where we've got Maction finally back. Midweek Maction, one of the best late season traditions. The Mid-American Conference playing their games early on in the week. And this is a big one on Tuesday night between Ohio and Miami of Ohio, probably the two best teams in this league, and a likely preview of the conference title game. So we may get a rematch down the road, but it looks like the Bobcats are about a 3.5-point favorite at home. I would lean them to win and cover that number. I think the offense is much better for them. Miami, Ohio, a little bit of a defensive edge, but I believe in Parker Navarro, one of my favorite quarterbacks in college football. A lot of the other midweek games this week are pretty gross in terms of just a pure betting perspective, but if we move over to Friday, there are a couple of lines that are standing out to me. For one, a game that we mentioned a little bit earlier in the show, Houston opened as a 2.5-point favorite on the road at UCF. They are now a 1.5-point dog. So that line has quickly flipped to the Knights as a favorite. UCF is coming off of a blowout loss on Saturday to Baylor, 30-3. They looked completely anemic offensively, but they've looked very different at home so far this season. I will give them that. 4-1 at home, 0-3 on the road. Very poor offensive numbers on the road, but the strength of their team has been their defense. Same for Houston. I still probably trust the Cougars' offense a little bit more, but it's hard to trust their team overall after that performance against West Virginia. This is not one that I'm ready to lock in yet. Going to have to dig into it a little bit more, but I'm very interested to see where this number goes. If it goes too far towards UCF, I may jump in on the Cougars. Another line that is moving on Friday night is going to be Tulane against Memphis. Looks like Memphis opened up at 4.5. They're up to 6.5 now, close to a touchdown favorite. Tulane, I think, could be in a nice little buy low spot here, though. Obviously, back-to-back on the road, never easy. Second time they've had to do that this season. But they can't play much worse defensively than they did against UTSA. Memphis still has played one of the weakest schedules in the entire country. They do have the big win 2 weeks ago against South Florida, and you got to give them credit for that, but they were down 17 points in the fourth quarter, so not a result that would have happened too many times if you simulate that game over a larger scale. So Memphis, I'm still not 100% sold on. I will likely be on the road dog with Tulane in that one. Some lines that are sticking out to me on Saturday. Let me start with a little bit of a gross game in the ACC, because this is a team I feel like I've had a very good read on over the past few weeks, and that's SMU traveling to Boston College. I think this is a very, very tricky spot for the Mustangs. They just beat Miami, one of their biggest wins in years. Now they have to turn around and go play an East Coast game in cold weather against a really bad team. I think it's going to be difficult for them to get up for this one in terms of being motivated to go out and win in a blowout. I think Boston College can provide a little bit more resistance offensively than some of the other teams SMU's been playing recently. So give me the Eagles plus the 10.5 at home. That line is also moving as we speak. It opened at 13.5. Quickly got bought down. If it crosses 10, that's obviously a very key number. So this is maybe one that I would consider locking in early, even though I typically wait till Saturday to lock in most of our wagers. As I said earlier, we've got a top 10 matchup in the Big 12 between BYU and Texas Tech. The Red Raiders are now a 10.5 point favorite at home in this game. I will not be touching this one because BYU has just cursed me. I've had very, very bad luck with that team, so I have learned to just not bet on their games. However, I do think Texas Tech is the right side here. This should be a blowout, truthfully. BYU has very much overperformed, but then again, it's possible that continues. So, once again, not going to be getting involved in this one. Just notable that it's such a massive spread for the home team. Big game in the Big Ten at 3:30 that I think some are probably overlooking, and that is Oregon going to Iowa. The Hawkeyes are only catching 5.5 points here. You guys have heard me talk before if you've listened to other episodes of this podcast. 5.5 is such a key number for underdogs. It is truly bait when you're betting on favorites because not only are you getting under a touchdown, but also the key number of 6, which allows you to win if it's a 2 field goal margin or if something happens with an extra point or a 2 point conversion, anything weird like that. Dogs at 5.5 are a great target week after week, and I will almost certainly be taking Iowa in this game. Unranked still, but they've been playing phenomenally, especially at the lines of scrimmage on both sides. Oregon, very unproven in my opinion, especially when you start really digging into the schedule. The only notable win is at Penn State, a team that's a complete disaster as it turns out. So I'm not really buying into Oregon, and I think Iowa is one of the most difficult places to play in the country. So I will ride with the home dog and the Hawkeyes in that one. Big game in the SEC between two top 20 teams in Texas A&M and Missouri. A&M currently about a 7 point favorite on the road, and the biggest reason for that is Missouri quarterback Bo Pribula likely out for the season. That's now 2 quarterbacks that Mizzou has injured. At the beginning of the year, it was Pribula and Sam Horn battling over the position. Horn got hurt on his first snap of the first game, and now Pribula will be out as well. So a lot of question marks at that position, but I think the rest of that Missouri roster is definitely good enough to keep this a competitive game regardless. Always like betting on backup quarterbacks, but I would like to find out a little bit more information on the guy before I place American dollars on him. If we look to the night slate, we've got a couple of very sketchy spreads, in my opinion, starting in the SEC with Florida going to Kentucky. Just a 3 point favorite now on the road. It was 4.5. I really wish I would have hopped on that number immediately with the Wildcats. I don't think it's going to matter, though. Kentucky's winning this game. Florida, as I said, probably not a lot to play for now after the Georgia game. Teams this season consistently have gotten a bit of a boost the game after firing their coach, and we did see that for most of this Georgia game. As I said, they had a chance to win it outright. I don't know if we're going to be able to get a repeat effort out of them on the road against a Kentucky team that views this game much more as a rivalry than Florida does. Mark Stoops has made it a mission of his to beat Florida after finally ending that very long winning streak, after finally ending the very long losing streak that they had against Florida. I think it was 33 seasons before he arrived. He has completely changed that in the series, and I think they get yet another one outright here for Kentucky. Another one that I honestly just don't know how to read, but I want to note it because a couple of years ago, this would have been a massive ACC matchup, arguably the game of the year in the conference. This year, it doesn't matter too much. It's Florida State going into Clemson. The Tigers are a 2.5 point home favorite, which tells you that the books think Florida State is the better team on a neutral field. Both of these teams have massively underperformed expectations. I would say more so Clemson because nobody really knew exactly what to expect out of Florida State coming off of 12-0 2 years ago and then 2-10 last year. But FSU is 1-4 in the league. I will say I think they figured a lot of things out this past week against Wake Forest coming off the bye. They won 42-7, pretty impressive performance. And Clemson, as we noted earlier, 4 home losses already. I think this could be number 5. One more game that I'll highlight for you guys before we close this thing out. If you want a more thorough breakdown of the entire slate, be sure to join us over on Twitter at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, Saturday morning. We go over the entire slate with a couple of co-hosts and talk through all the biggest games and give y'all our picks, our analysis, and all that good stuff. So be sure to join us over there. But one more game that I want to highlight in the night slate this Saturday for Week 11. That's LSU going into Alabama. Coaches fired system. As I said earlier, there's been a consistent theme of teams covering spreads the week after they fire their coach. It always gives the team just a little bit of an emotional boost, and we've seen it time and time again. The most notable example, obviously, was UAB beating Memphis as a 24-point underdog the week after they fired Trent Dilfer. I'm not saying LSU is going to go in there and beat Alabama, but I do think the offense is going to be a little bit more free-flowing. They're not going to be feeling the pressure as much as maybe there was before the season. There's just been a lot of pressure on this LSU team and organization to make the playoffs and achieve a lot of goals that they have not previously under Brian Kelly. Now that all those are kind of out the window, there's not much to lose, and there's got to be revenge on their minds in this game after last year. Jalen Milroe went into Death Valley and just embarrassed that LSU defense, ran all over them. I think it's going to be a very different game this year. I'm expecting LSU to show up and compete. Alabama, I'm not sprinting to the window to fade them by any means. I think they're arguably the best team in the country. They've been spectacular ever since the Florida State loss, but they don't exactly pull away from teams. And that's kind of been a theme throughout Kalen DeBoer's career at Washington, at Alabama, all over the place. He plays a lot of one-possession games as a coach, and I fully expect that to be the case here as well. So LSU currently plus 10.5 on the spread, arguably my favorite early look for Week 11. So if you want to lock that one in early, be my guest. All right, appreciate everybody for joining and listening into the podcast today. If you did enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform that you're listening to this on. If you're on Spotify, there is a poll every single week below the podcast that you can answer. It's just a quick question of who you were most impressed by. I really probably should have been mentioning this more often as we went through the podcast, but if you want to participate in those, feel free, and always looking for feedback as well. If you want to leave a comment on any of the platforms you're using, I will see those and always appreciate the listeners giving me feedback. So that will do it for today's episode. Appreciate everybody for listening, and until next time, have a great rest of your day.